Have you ever woken up from surgery and realized someone you trust is stealing from you while you're still lying there, barely able to move? Not a stranger. Not a burglar. Your own child. That's the moment I realized something was very, very wrong. And the worst part? My daughter had no idea I could hear every word she was saying. Let me take you back to that morning. But before we continue, my name is Margaret Collins. I'm 67 years old, a retired school librarian, and until recently I believed I had a pretty simple life. Quiet house. Quiet neighborhood. The kind of life where nothing dramatic ever happens. Or at least, that's what I thought. 3 weeks ago, I went into the hospital for a scheduled surgery. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough that my doctor insisted I shouldn't postpone it. Dr. Samuel Patel, my surgeon, explained everything carefully. Margaret, he told me, the procedure should take about 3 hours. After that, you'll spend some time in recovery while the anesthesia wears off. I nodded. 3 hours didn't sound so bad. What I didn't realize was that those 3 hours would end up exposing something I never thought possible. Because the person I trusted to take care of things while I was in surgery was my daughter, Angela Collins. She's 38 years old. My only child. And for most of her life, I would have told anyone who asked that Angela and I were close. After my husband died 15 years ago, it was just the two of us. I worked 2 jobs back then. One at the library, one tutoring in the evenings. I did everything I could to keep our house, the one my husband and I bought when Angela was just 5 years old. That house wasn't fancy. But it held everything. Every birthday party. Every Christmas dinner. Every argument. Every reconciliation. And inside that house were things that meant more to me than money ever could. The sofa my husband picked out after we finally paid off the mortgage. The oak dining table he built himself in our garage one summer. A sideboard cabinet that belonged to my parents. 30 years of life. 30 years of memories. So the morning of my surgery, Angela offered to come to the hospital with me. Mom, she said, you shouldn't go through this alone. That meant something to me. It really did. When we arrived at the hospital, Angela stayed by my side while they prepared me. She held my purse while the nurses ran their tests. She joked with the staff. She even squeezed my hand before they wheeled me into the operating room. Don't worry, she said. I'll be right here when you wake up. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever had surgery before? If you have, you probably know what anesthesia feels like. One moment you're awake. The next moment, everything disappears. Or at least, that's how it's supposed to work. But sometimes, it doesn't happen that cleanly. Sometimes the body wakes up before the mind catches up. And sometimes, you hear things you were never supposed to hear. Before they wheeled me in, Angela asked for my phone. Mom, she said, you might get calls. I'll hold on to it in case the hospital needs anything. I handed it to her without thinking. Why wouldn't I? She was my daughter. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took over was the bright surgical lights above me. Then everything went dark. The next thing I remember was sound. Distant voices. Machines beeping. And the strange floating feeling that comes when the anesthesia hasn't fully worn off yet. I couldn't open my eyes. My arms felt heavy. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. But my hearing was perfectly clear. At first I assumed the voices were nurses. Hospitals are never quiet, especially recovery rooms. Then I heard something familiar. Angela's voice. She wasn't in the room. She was standing outside in the hallway. And she was talking on the phone. At least, I thought she was talking on the phone. But then I heard something else. The faint echo of another voice. Speakerphone. Angela had my phone. And she had put the call on speaker. At first I didn't think much about it. Maybe she was handling something for me. Maybe a neighbor had called. Maybe someone from church. But then I heard her say something that made my mind snap awake. "Yeah," Angela said casually. "You can take the sofa." For a second, I thought I misunderstood. "The sofa? What sofa?" Then she continued. "The dining table too." My heart began pounding. Because there was only one dining table she could possibly be talking about. The one in my house. The one her father built. I tried to move. I tried to open my eyes. But my body still wouldn't respond. Angela kept talking. "She won't be home today," she said. "She's still in surgery." My stomach dropped. Because suddenly, everything made sense. She wasn't talking about selling something online. She wasn't talking about an old chair or a spare lamp. She was talking about my entire living room. And then I heard the sentence that made the room spin. Angela laughed softly. And said 5 words I will never forget. "Just sell whatever you want." In that moment I realized something terrifying. My daughter thought I was unconscious. She thought I couldn't hear her. But I could. And as I lay there in that hospital bed, listening to her plan the emptying of my house, I realized something else. I wasn't the only one hearing that conversation. And what happened next was something my daughter never expected. Have you ever been completely powerless, yet fully aware that something terrible is happening? That was exactly the position I was in. Lying in a hospital recovery bed. Barely able to move. Barely able to speak. But hearing every word of the conversation happening just outside the door. My daughter's voice was calm. Casual, even. That's what made it worse. Because when someone is nervous about doing something wrong, you can usually hear it in their voice. Angela didn't sound nervous. She sounded organized. Like this had already been planned. The other voice on the speakerphone was a man. Deep voice. Slightly rough, like someone used to negotiating deals. "You said the sofa is still in good shape?" he asked. Angela laughed lightly. "Oh yeah. Barely used." Barely used? I almost would have laughed if my body had been capable of it. That sofa had been in our living room for 20 years. It had coffee stains from Angela's college years. A scratch on the arm from the time our old dog tried to jump up and slipped. Barely used. The man continued. "And the dining table?" Angela answered quickly. "You can take that too." My heart began pounding against my ribs. That dining table wasn't just furniture. My husband, Daniel, had built it himself. He spent 3 weekends in the garage sanding the wood. I can still remember the smell of sawdust drifting into the kitchen. Angela was 16 when he finished it. We ate every Thanksgiving dinner at that table. Every birthday cake. Every quiet Sunday breakfast. And now she was selling it like it was something she found on the side of the road. The man on the phone asked another question. "You sure your mother won't be back today?" Angela didn't hesitate. "She's still in surgery." Then she added something that made my stomach turn. "Even if she wakes up, they'll keep her overnight." I tried to move again. My fingers twitched slightly against the hospital sheet. But my body still felt trapped. Imagine being awake in your own body, but unable to control it. Imagine hearing someone dismantle your life piece by piece. While you're stuck listening. Angela kept talking. "There's also a cabinet in the dining room," she said. "Antique. My grandmother's." The man sounded interested. "Solid wood?" "Yeah," Angela said. "You could probably get a lot for it." "A lot." She was already calculating the money. The man paused for a moment. Then he asked a question that made the hallway go quiet. "Does your mom know you're selling this stuff?" Angela didn't answer right away. And that silence said everything. Then she gave a little sigh. Look, she said, lowering her voice slightly. The house is basically mine anyway. Basically hers. That house had been in my name for 32 years. Every mortgage payment. Every repair. Every tax bill. Mine. But Angela continued. She won't even notice half this stuff is gone, she said. And honestly, she has too much furniture anyway. Too much furniture. That's how quickly memories become stuff to someone who doesn't value them. The man cleared his throat. So when should I come pick it up? Angela didn't hesitate. This afternoon. This afternoon. My chest tightened. If the surgery had gone exactly as planned, I would have been in recovery for hours. Maybe even overnight. Which meant by the time I came home, my living room could be empty. The man continued. I'll bring a truck and 2 guys, he said. Around 2 o'clock. Angela replied immediately. Perfect. Then she said the sentence that made my blood run cold. She won't be home today. There it was again. She had planned this around my surgery. Around the one moment when she knew I wouldn't be able to stop her. Have you ever had that realization? The moment when you understand something wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. Carefully. Quietly. Angela laughed again. And then she said something even worse. Just sell whatever you want. Those 5 words echoed in my head. Sell whatever you want. Not just the sofa. Not just the table. Everything. The man chuckled on the phone. Well, that makes things easier. Angela said, yeah. I'll meet you at the house. Then the call ended. The hallway went quiet. I lay there staring at the darkness behind my closed eyelids. Trying to process what I had just heard. My daughter wasn't just borrowing something. She wasn't cleaning the house. She was selling it piece by piece. And she believed she had the perfect window to do it. My surgery. My weakness. My silence. But here's the part Angela didn't expect. Anesthesia wears off slowly. And by the time the call ended, I could finally move my hand. Just barely. My fingers twitched against the sheet. A nurse noticed immediately. Margaret, a voice said gently. It was a woman. Nurse Lydia Morris. I had met her before the surgery. Margaret, can you hear me? I forced my lips to move. It felt like trying to speak underwater. But eventually one word came out. Yes. The nurse leaned closer. You're waking up, she said softly. Your surgery went well. I nodded slightly. But I wasn't thinking about the surgery. I was thinking about my house. My sofa. My husband's table. And the moving truck that was probably already being scheduled. The nurse asked a simple question. Do you need anything? I swallowed slowly. Then I whispered 3 words. Call my neighbor. The nurse looked confused. Your neighbor? I nodded again. Harold Bennett. Harold had lived next door for 25 years. He and my husband used to drink coffee together every Saturday morning. The nurse hesitated. Margaret, is everything okay? I took a shallow breath. And said something that made her eyes widen. Someone is robbing my house. But what I didn't know yet was that the truck had already been scheduled. And at that exact moment, it was already on its way. Have you ever had that moment when you know something terrible is happening? And the clock is ticking? Because that's what it felt like lying in that recovery room. Every second felt heavy. Every minute mattered. And somewhere across town, a truck was probably being loaded with the pieces of my life. The nurse, Lydia Morris, stared at me like she was trying to decide whether I was confused from anesthesia or deadly serious. Margaret, she said gently, are you saying someone is breaking into your house? I shook my head slowly. No. My voice was still weak, but the words came out clearer this time. My daughter. That stopped her. She leaned a little closer. What do you mean your daughter? I swallowed, trying to gather enough breath to explain. She's selling my furniture, I whispered. Lydia blinked. It sounded unbelievable, even to me. But then I added the part that made the situation very real. She thinks I'm still in surgery. The nurse looked toward the hallway, then back at me. Did you hear this? Yes. Just now? Yes. There was a moment where she clearly realized I wasn't confused. I was alert. And whatever I heard had frightened me enough to ask for help immediately. Okay, she said calmly. Let's slow down. But I shook my head again. There isn't time. That part was true. Because Angela had already scheduled the pickup. 2:00. The man on the phone had said it clearly. And if I knew anything about furniture dealers, it was this. When a truck is coming, it's already loaded with straps, blankets, and workers ready to move fast. Lydia hesitated. Hospitals have rules. They don't usually involve themselves in family disputes. But something in my face must have convinced her. Who did you want me to call? She asked. Harold Bennett. Your neighbor? Yes. Harold had lived next door to me for 25 years. He knew my house almost as well as I did. More importantly, he knew my husband's dining table. Because he helped Daniel carry it into the house the day it was finished. Lydia nodded slowly. Do you know his number? I told her. She pulled out her phone and stepped slightly away from the bed while dialing. The ringing seemed to last forever. Then finally she said, Hello, is this Harold Bennett? Pause. Yes, I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. Margaret Collins asked me to contact you. I watched her expression carefully as she listened. Yes, Lydia continued, she just woke up from surgery. Another pause. Then Lydia glanced at me again. She says there may be people removing furniture from her house this afternoon. The silence on the other end of the call must have been long. Because Lydia eventually said something that made my heart beat faster. Yes, she believes her daughter arranged it. Another pause. Then Lydia's eyebrows lifted slightly. All right. I'll let her speak with you. She walked back to the bed and gently placed the phone against my ear. Harold? I said. His voice came through instantly. Margaret? What on earth is going on? I took a slow breath. Angela is selling the furniture. What? I heard her, I said. She thinks I'm still unconscious. There was a short silence. Then Harold asked the most important question. When? This afternoon. Another pause. Then Harold said something that made me feel the smallest bit of relief. Well, that explains the truck. My heart jumped. What truck? It just pulled up about 5 minutes ago, Harold said. 5 minutes. They were already there. My mind raced. Harold, I said quickly, you have to stop them. Who's there? I don't know, I admitted. A man named Rick. Harold's voice turned serious. All right. Stay calm. I'm going over there now. I could hear him already moving, the sound of a door opening and footsteps outside. Then the line went quiet. Lydia gently took the phone back. Your neighbor is checking on things, she said. But I barely heard her. Because in my mind, I could already picture what was happening. A truck parked outside my house. Men carrying blankets and straps. Angela standing in the doorway pretending she owned everything inside. Selling 30 years of memories like they were items at a yard sale. Across town, Harold was walking up my driveway. He later told me exactly what he saw. A white moving truck parked in front of my house. 2 men unloading dollies. And Angela standing on the porch with her arms crossed like she was supervising the whole operation. Harold walked across the lawn slowly. Angela noticed him almost immediately. "Oh," she said. "Hi, Harold." Her tone was light. Friendly. Like nothing unusual was happening. Harold looked past her toward the movers. "What's going on here?" he asked. Angela smiled. "Just clearing out some old furniture." "Your mom knows about this?" Harold asked. Angela nodded quickly. Of course. But Harold didn't believe her. Because he had known Margaret Collins for 25 years. And he knew something Angela didn't. Margaret had once told him something very specific about that dining table. She had said, "That table leaves this house the day I die." So Harold asked a question Angela wasn't ready for. "Margaret asked you to sell Daniel's table?" Angela's smile flickered for just a moment. Then she recovered. "Yeah," she said quickly. "She wants to downsize." Harold stared at her. Because Margaret Collins had never once talked about downsizing. Not once. At that moment one of the movers walked out carrying a thick moving blanket. Behind him stood a man in his mid-40s holding a clipboard. Rick. The furniture buyer. He looked at Harold. "Everything okay here?" Rick asked. Harold answered calmly. "That depends." Rick frowned slightly. "On what?" Harold looked directly at Angela. "On whether Margaret actually knows you're selling her house." The air on the porch went completely still. Angela's smile disappeared. Rick slowly turned his head toward her. And asked a question that would change everything. "Wait. Is this house in your name?" Angela didn't answer. And that silence told Rick exactly what he needed to know. Have you ever noticed how silence can reveal more than words? Because the moment Rick asked that question, the entire scene outside my house changed. "Is this house in your name?" Angela didn't answer. And when someone hesitates at a moment like that, everyone notices. Rick noticed. The two movers noticed. And Harold definitely noticed. Angela looked from Rick to Harold, clearly trying to decide how to recover the situation. Then she forced a small laugh. "Well, it's basically mine," she said. Rick didn't smile. "What does basically mean?" he asked. Angela crossed her arms defensively. "I'm her daughter," she said. Rick waited. Angela added quickly, "I'll inherit it anyway." That answer didn't satisfy him. Rick had been buying and reselling furniture for over 20 years. People like him learn very quickly how to read situations. And this situation had just gone from routine pickup to something else entirely. Rick looked at Harold. "Do you know the owner of the house?" he asked. Harold didn't hesitate. "Yes." "And?" "She's Margaret Collins." Rick turned back to Angela. "And where is Margaret Collins right now?" Angela's voice hardened. "She's in surgery." That part, at least, was true. But Rick asked the question Angela clearly didn't expect. "Did she tell you to sell her furniture?" Angela rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, this is ridiculous," she said. "Yes." Harold spoke calmly. "No, she didn't." Angela turned on him immediately. "Harold, this is none of your business." But Harold didn't back down. "Actually," he said quietly, "Margaret asked me to stop this." Angela froze. For a moment the only sound on the porch was the hum of the truck engine. Rick's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean she asked you to stop it?" Harold pulled out his phone. "She called me from the hospital 10 minutes ago." Angela's face drained of color. That was the moment everything changed. Because Angela had built her entire plan on one assumption. That I was unconscious. That I had no idea what she was doing. Rick crossed his arms. so she knows about this? Harold nodded. Everything. Angela's mouth opened slightly. Then she laughed again, but this time the laugh sounded forced. She must still be groggy from anesthesia, Angela said quickly. She probably misunderstood. But Harold shook his head slowly. No, he said. She heard the phone call. Rick looked from Harold to Angela. Then he said something very simple. Stop loading. The two movers immediately paused. Angela spun toward Rick. What are you doing? Rick answered calmly. I'm making sure I'm not participating in theft. Angela's voice rose. It's not theft. Rick raised an eyebrow. Then show me something that says you own this furniture. Angela didn't move. Rick waited. The movers stood awkwardly beside the truck. Harold remained perfectly calm. Angela finally snapped. This is ridiculous, she said. It's family property. Rick shrugged. Family property still has an owner. Angela looked furious now. You're really going to cancel the deal because of some old man sticking his nose into things? Rick didn't respond right away. Instead he asked another question. How much were you planning to sell the dining table for? Angela hesitated. Then she said, 800. Rick let out a low whistle. That table's worth at least 4,000. Angela blinked. Wait, what? Rick gestured toward the house. That's hand-built oak, he said. Old craftsmanship. Angela's expression shifted. Because suddenly she realized something. She had undervalued it. Rick continued. Which tells me something else. Angela frowned. What? You didn't ask your mom, Rick said. Angela clenched her jaw. Look, she snapped, are you buying the furniture or not? Rick stared at her for a long moment. Then he slowly shook his head. No. Angela's voice rose immediately. What do you mean no? I mean the deal is off. Angela's eyes widened. You can't just cancel like that. Rick gave a small shrug. Actually I can. Angela pointed toward the truck. You already drove all the way here. Rick nodded. Yeah. And? And now I'm leaving. Angela stepped closer to him. You're seriously going to listen to him instead of me? Rick replied calmly. I'm listening to the person who owns the house. Angela's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. She's not even here. Rick nodded again. Exactly. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Angela said something that stunned everyone standing there. Something she clearly didn't realize Rick was about to remember forever. Angela scoffed. Fine, she muttered. Sell it after she dies then. The porch went silent. Rick slowly reached into his pocket. And pulled out his phone. Because what Angela didn't know was that he had just started recording. Section complete. Waiting for Go. Go. Have you ever said something in anger, and realized too late that someone was listening? Because the moment those words left Angela's mouth, everything changed. Fine, she said coldly. Sell it after she dies then. For a split second, no one moved. Not Harold. Not the movers. Not even Rick. The air on the porch felt heavy, like a storm had suddenly rolled in. Rick slowly slipped his phone back into his pocket. His expression had changed completely. Up until that moment, he had looked like a businessman caught in an awkward situation. Now he looked like someone who had just witnessed something ugly. He spoke calmly. All right, he said. That's enough. Angela folded her arms. Enough of what? Rick nodded toward the truck. We're done here. Angela's eyes widened. You're serious? Rick turned to the movers. Pack it up. The two men didn't argue. They began folding the blankets they had already unloaded. Angela's voice rose. You can't just walk away. Rick looked back at her. Actually, I can. Angela stepped closer, clearly furious now. I invited you here. I made a deal with you. Rick shrugged slightly. And now I'm canceling that deal. Angela's jaw tightened. This is unbelievable. Rick pointed toward the house behind her. You tried to sell furniture you don't own. Angela snapped back immediately. It's my mother's. Rick nodded slowly. Exactly. That one word hung in the air. Angela turned toward Harold, clearly hoping to redirect her anger. This is your fault, she said. Harold remained perfectly calm. My fault? Yes, Angela said sharply. You had no right to interfere. Harold's voice stayed steady. Margaret asked me to. Angela scoffed. She's probably barely awake. Harold tilted his head slightly. Awake enough to know what you were doing. Angela turned back toward Rick, clearly trying one last time. Look, she said quickly, I'll give you the whole living room set for $2,000. Rick didn't respond. Angela continued. That's a good deal. Rick shook his head slowly. I'm not buying stolen property. Angela's eyes flashed. It's not stolen. Rick raised an eyebrow. Then prove it. Angela opened her mouth. But no words came out. Because the truth was simple. She couldn't prove it. Rick turned toward the movers again. Let's go. The two men climbed back into the truck. The engine started with a low rumble. Angela stood frozen on the porch. She had been so sure this would work. So sure that the house would be empty. So sure that by the time I came home, it would already be done. But now the truck was leaving. And Harold was still standing there. Watching her. The truck slowly pulled away from the curb. Angela stared after it, stunned. Then she turned back toward Harold, her face burning with anger. You're going to regret this, she said. Harold shrugged. Maybe. Angela pointed toward the house. That furniture is mine eventually anyway. Harold didn't answer. Instead, he said something that made Angela pause. Margaret asked me to tell you something. Angela frowned. What? Harold looked directly at her. She heard the entire phone call. Angela's face went pale. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she laughed nervously. That's impossible. Harold shook his head. No, it isn't. Angela's voice grew tight. She was under anesthesia. Harold replied quietly. Apparently not enough. Angela looked toward the street where the truck had disappeared. Then back at Harold. You're lying. Harold pulled out his phone. No, he said. I'm not. Angela stared at him. What is that? Harold turned the screen slightly toward her. It's Margaret. Angela's stomach dropped. Because the call was still connected. And through that tiny speaker. My voice came through. Weak. But very clear. Angela. For a moment the entire world seemed to stop. Angela didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't even breathe. Then finally she whispered one word. Mom? Back in the hospital room, I held the phone weakly against my ear. My heart was racing. But my voice stayed calm. Why were you selling my furniture? Angela looked around wildly, like she was hoping someone would tell her this wasn't happening. Mom, she said quickly, this is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Isn't that always the first excuse? When someone gets caught. I asked one simple question. The dining table, I said quietly. How much were you selling it for? Angela hesitated. Mom, I was just. $800, I finished. Angela froze. Because that was exactly the number she had said earlier. The silence between us stretched. Then Angela tried again. I was just helping you declutter. Declutter. 30 years of memories. My husband's table. My parents' cabinet. Declutter. Angela, I said slowly. I heard everything. Angela's eyes filled with panic. You were supposed to be asleep, she blurted. The moment those words came out of her mouth, Harold closed his eyes. Because Angela had just said the worst possible thing. She hadn't denied it. She had confirmed it. You were supposed to be asleep. I took a slow breath. And asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since I woke up. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Angela didn't answer. The street was quiet. The truck was gone. Harold stood beside her silently. And for the first time since the conversation started, Angela had no idea what to say. But what she didn't realize yet was that the worst part of this story hadn't happened yet. What would you do if your own child admitted they expected you to be unconscious while they emptied your house? That question hung in the air between us. Angela stood on the porch of my home, holding Harold's phone like it had suddenly become something dangerous. Her voice, when she finally spoke again, sounded very different from before. Quieter. Careful. Mom, she said, you're overreacting. Overreacting. I almost laughed when she said that. Because let's be honest for a moment. If someone tried to sell your living room while you were in surgery, would you call that an overreaction? Angela continued quickly, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. I was just trying to help you, she said. You've been talking about simplifying things for years. I stared at the hospital ceiling while she spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above me. Machines beeped quietly beside the bed. And for the first time since waking up, I felt something stronger than shock. Clarity. Angela, I said slowly, I have never once said I wanted to sell your father's table. There was silence on the other end of the call. Then she tried another angle. Well, you weren't using it. That sentence landed harder than anything else she had said. Not using it. Memories don't need to be used. They just need to exist. Harold spoke quietly from the porch. Angela, maybe you should stop. But Angela ignored him. Mom, she continued, this isn't a big deal. The guy already left. Exactly. The guy had left. Which meant the only reason my house wasn't half empty right now was because Harold happened to walk outside at the right moment. That realization made something settle inside my mind. Because suddenly this wasn't just about furniture. It was about trust. And once trust breaks, it never really goes back the way it was. I asked her another question. Angela, when were you planning to tell me? She didn't answer. Which told me everything. She had never planned to tell me. I could almost picture her expression standing there on the porch. The defensive posture. The tight jaw. The look she used to get when she was a teenager caught doing something she knew was wrong. But this wasn't a teenager sneaking out after curfew. This was a grown woman trying to sell someone else's property. Angela finally sighed. Mom, look, she said, you're making this bigger than it is. That's when I asked the question she couldn't dodge. Why today? Angela hesitated. And that hesitation confirmed something I had already suspected. You scheduled this around my surgery, I said quietly. No, Angela said quickly. But her voice cracked slightly. Which meant the answer was yes. She had counted on the exact window where I would be unconscious. Where no one would stop her. Where the house would be empty. Except she forgot something important. Neighbors notice things. And Harold Bennett had been watching that house for 25 years. Harold spoke again. Angela, he said gently, maybe you should go home. Angela snapped. This is my home. Harold didn't argue. Instead, he said something very calm. The deed says otherwise. Another silence fell over the porch. I took a slow breath and shifted slightly in the hospital bed. My body still felt weak, but my thoughts were sharp now. Clear. And clarity brings decisions. Angela, I said. Yes? When you were talking to that man earlier. She didn't respond. I heard something else, I continued. Angela's voice tightened. What? You said the house was basically yours. She didn't deny it. Which meant she had said it. I continued. Did you really believe that? Angela exhaled loudly. Well, eventually it will be. That word again. Eventually. The assumption that time guarantees entitlement. But life doesn't work that way. And neither does inheritance. I asked her one final question. When did you start planning this? Angela didn't answer. But Harold did. Rick said the truck was scheduled earlier this morning, he said quietly. Earlier that morning. Which meant Angela had arranged everything before even driving me to the hospital. That realization hit harder than anything else. She hadn't decided this suddenly. She had planned it. Every detail. The surgery. The phone. The empty house. Everything. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I was tired. Because I was thinking. Angela must have sensed the shift in my voice when I spoke again. Because this time, she sounded nervous. Mom? Yes. You're not seriously upset about this, are you? That question surprised me. Not because of what she asked. But because she genuinely seemed confused. As if she still believed this was a small mistake. That's when I said something that made Harold glance sharply at her. Angela, I said calmly. I changed my will last month. There was a long pause. What, she said. I updated my estate plan, I continued. Angela's voice grew tight. Why? Good question. Why would a 67-year-old woman suddenly review her estate documents? The answer was simple. Because sometimes instinct whispers before the truth becomes visible. I explained quietly. After your father died, I left everything to you. Angela didn't speak. But recently, I said, I decided to make some adjustments. Harold shifted slightly on the porch. Angela sounded uneasy now. What kind of adjustments? I took a slow breath. The kind that protect my house. Angela's voice dropped to a whisper. Protect it from who? I answered with one sentence. From people who think I'm supposed to be asleep. The silence on the line stretched longer than before. But Angela still didn't realize something important. The will wasn't the biggest surprise. The biggest surprise was who else was now involved in it. And when she found out, it was going to change everything.